It's so odd to be here. It feels so strange. For so long, the strength of the church has been in the gathering of its people. And yet we're scattered. Maybe I could have the courage enough to say there are moments it doesn't feel like Easter. There's a book, and it's a kid's book, but as I was thinking about Easter, in fact, if you had asked me 90 days ago, or if you had asked me any time, hey, describe Easter if the church can't gather in person and it's all online. Describe Easter that way. I would have probably had this book come to mind. It's called Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. And it's a book that kind of follows this little guy, this little kid, and it kind of goes through his day, and that's a refrain over and over again, that Alexander is having this terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. And the reasons for this are pretty simple. He has lima beans, and he hates lima beans. And so he's not interested in that, and that creates this, or adds to this terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. He has to wear his railroad pajamas, and he hates his railroad pajamas. You know, of all the pajamas he could have wore, railroad is what his mama put out for him. His bath was too hot, you know, which I don't know how that's possible. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't know how it's possible. I love me a hot bath. Come on. Hey, bath was too hot. He lost a marble down the drain. Now, I get that. If my kid loses a marble down the drain, it messes up my plumbing. You best believe we're having a horrible, terrible, no good, very bad day. And I think for a lot of us, if we've been a part of a church for a long time, that we've walked into Easter Sunday thinking, you know what? Our circumstances, because of our circumstances, this can't be good. It must be defined as a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. Which I get it. As if our circumstances have anything to do with what could be called good. I'll say it again. As if our circumstances has anything to do with what can be called good. It certainly didn't work for the last Friday before the first Easter Sunday, did it? The entire world thought that Friday would never go down as being considered good. In fact, they would probably say it was the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day to end all days. But they were wrong about that Friday. The world remembers that Friday as Good Friday, as if the circumstances have anything to do with what can be called good. The first Good Friday was anything but good in terms of circumstantial evidence. The religious leaders of the day on the Sunday prior had watched a parade for the most popular and beloved rabbi in the history of the Jewish people. I mean, there were millions of people. They were saying, Hosanna to the King. They were saying, save us. Salvation is here. They were looking at this man going down Broadway on this donkey with his followers, and like, finally, we have a liberator. We have someone that will free us. He is here. The next day, Jesus begins to undo some pretty nasty practices that had happened in the worship space of God. And he starts to flip over some tables. And the religious leaders are seeing him do this. And they begin to say to themselves, all right, this is enough. We've had enough of this. We got to do something about it. The people were amazed at the teaching of Jesus. And they said, no, we got to fix this. He's ruining everything. He's kicking out religion and introducing a relationship with God. And that's no good for us. The religious leaders, they were more inclined to say, you know what? We would prefer that people come through religious leaders to have a relationship with God. But Jesus was saying, no, God wants to know you personally. That I've come to change things. That's what Jesus was saying. That he was here to usher in a new covenant, a new movement, a new relationship, a new way of connecting to God. And those in charge just weren't having it. And so they designed what we know as Good Friday to be the final Friday, to be the final Friday of the Christian movement, to be the final Friday of the followers of Jesus, to be the final Friday of the message of Jesus, to be the final Friday of the way of Jesus. And they engineered it perfectly. They arrested Jesus when there was no crowd. The millions of people that were in town for the Passover, that were there to celebrate, they arrested Jesus when none of them were around. They're all asleep. In fact, even the closest friends of Jesus, most of them were asleep until the soldiers showed up. Hundreds of people showed up to this tiny garden to arrest Jesus in the middle of the night. And they take Jesus away and they put him through some religious trials and they convict him. When the Jewish people wake up on Friday morning, Jesus is a convicted criminal. A convicted criminal. And so they were thinking in their mind, if we arrest Jesus, they'll riot. So we have to do it in the middle of the night while they're asleep. But if they wake up and they find we've arrested Jesus, they'll still riot. So how do we convince them this is the right thing to do? Oh, we got it. We'll convene every single religious leader called the Sanhedrin, and we will unanimously put out a verdict that says Jesus is guilty. That's what they decided. And it worked. But here's the problem. They didn't have the authority to give the death penalty. And so they had to go to Roman authorities to get that. And they did. They took the guilty verdict to them. And eventually Rome gives them what they want and says, sure, crucify him. As if his circumstances has anything to do with what God calls good. You see, the Sunday it started made the Friday before it good. The Sunday it started made the Friday before it good. It wasn't the circumstances of that day. It's what God was doing all around that made Friday good. You might be saying, wait, hold on. Maybe you've been listening with us Thursday and Friday, a little bit Saturday. Maybe you've received some social media stuff from us. Maybe you've received some text messages from the church. Maybe you've gotten those and you keep seeing this phrase until the Sunday it started. And maybe you've been asking yourself, what? Can they not speak in complete sentences? Can we not get what the it is? Can you define what the it is? Well, we're going to. What do you think it is? What started that Sunday? What started that Sunday that gives us the ability to say our circumstances has nothing to do with the definition of good? That's it. Let's find out. Until the Sunday it started, people connected to Jesus were running for their lives. Like running for their lives. As soon as they arrested Jesus, all of his followers recognized if they can get to him, believe me, they can get to me. And so they were running for their lives. They were running for their lives. Well, that is until the Sunday it started. Those running men and women, they're running for their lives. That running led to hiding. Eventually, they closed themselves behind locked doors in basements, places that Roman authorities would never look. Well, that is until the Sunday it started. You see, that Friday, hope died on a cross. It was actually buried in the ground, and it stayed there. Well, until the Sunday it started. Death was king. Death was in charge until the Sunday it started. It was a time for mourning, a time for great sadness. That is, until the Sunday it started. Sin had won. Sin had conquered. It was time to wrestle with the reality of defeat. Well, until the Sunday it started. Can you imagine the time that Satan must have been having, the enemy, as he throws this enormous party, that from the very beginning of the fall, that Satan had been trying to get back at God, and the way that he got back at him was to say, I'm going to undo the plan that you put together to rescue the entire world. And in those moments, Satan must have been throwing the biggest shindig on the planet. And everyone's high-fiving. Did you see that? The Son of God drew his last breath. Did you see how he suffered? Did you see how he humiliated him? Did you see how we put him in the ground today? How many other people can say they put Jesus in the ground? No, just Satan. Just the enemy. Oh, the party he must have been having. Well, until the Sunday it started. And then it changed everything. Sometimes we need a reminder about the Sunday it started. And if we're honest with ourselves, just to say, hey, maybe we need a reminder a little more often than once a year. But we're in good company needing that reminder. One of Jesus' closest friends named Peter recognized in a church plant, as he was church planting all over, he recognized that there were numerous people scattered abroad that needed a reminder of what started that Sunday. In fact, when we read the book of 1 Peter that we find in the New Testament in the Bible, if you have a Bible, it's pretty easy to find. You pretty much almost go to the end. Not quite the end, but if you go to the end and start working backwards, it's marked here in my Bible, and you can see it's almost towards the end. We're going to spend a little bit of time in 1 Peter chapter 1, but don't worry about it if you don't have a Bible with you or you don't have a Bible at all. We're going to put it on the screen as we kind of walk through it. And so Peter writes this book, and he writes it about 30 or 40 years after Jesus has resurrected that very first Easter. And so he's writing to a group of people that just 30 or 40 years after Jesus, now we're 2,000 years post-Jesus, so only 30 or 40 years after Jesus, there's a group of believers, in fact, there's a lot of believers that are needing a reminder of what started that Sunday morning. And so he begins to write. And he's writing to a group of people that are forgetting the magic that happened, the mystery that happened, the incredible moments that happened the Sunday it started. And they're forgetting it because they're undergoing quite a bit of persecution and suffering. They're actually walking through a number of trials at this very moment. Peter has the authority to talk about suffering because Peter watched Jesus suffer. And not only that, not only did Peter watch Jesus suffer, was he an eyewitness of these things that we celebrate on Good Friday and Easter Sunday. Peter watched those things. Not only did he witness Jesus suffer, Peter also suffered himself. And in fact, he's experiencing, just like every other believer in the first century at this time, the persecution of a guy named Nero. Nero hated the Christians. And in fact, he had this plot one day that he needed to kind of renovate Rome, and so he set it on fire. And then when he never checked with anyone though. And so when people found out that he set Rome ablaze, they were pretty angry with him. And when he realized, hey, so my remodeling plan isn't going to be the greatest idea, he blamed someone. He blamed the Christians, right? He blamed the Christians. And so as he blamed the Christians, everyone then started to persecute and get angry. Like, how could you do this? You're trying to burn Rome to the ground. So they scattered everywhere. And so on these anniversaries of big moments, they're in their homes, kind of not gathering together in large groups. They're in these tiny little pockets of believers all over the place. And so Peter writes this letter as a reminder to the church scattered abroad and everywhere else in tiny little homes, to give them this reminder of what started that Sunday. Peter writes this letter to the scattered and scared church to remind them about the Sunday it started. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar to you this morning? This Easter morning? Let's jump in and see what Peter's reminder has to say. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 6, it says, "In all this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials." I'll read it to you again. "In all this you greatly rejoice, though Now for a little while, you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. Now, what's interesting here is, I want to break this down as we kind of walk through it, is of followers of Jesus, he's saying, hey, you greatly rejoice, right? You greatly rejoice, which that seems strange to me. It seems strange to me given the rest of the sentence, right? That you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you've had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. But he begins with greatly rejoice, like for real rejoice. Now, what does rejoicing look like to you? What's it look like? I mean, is it like a lottery win? Can you imagine what it looks like to win the lottery right now? I know if you're tuning in and you're like, I can't believe this church is talking about playing the lottery. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, lottery paid for most of my college. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. So, we just lost like 6 viewers. It stinks. There's other churches live streaming right now that probably don't play the lottery. You'll be fine. Greatly rejoice. What does it look like? What does it look like to greatly rejoice? A lottery win? Maybe it's a work promotion, right? Maybe it's a work promotion. You get this promotion at work and you're like, ooh, hot dog, get the steaks on the grill tonight. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know. I'm not sure. What does rejoicing look like? Do you remember the movie Rudy? Rudy. You remember it? Yeah, that's right. We got it. Rudy, at the end of the movie, after he sacks the Georgia Tech quarterback, go Dogs, come on. He sacks, he plays for Notre Dame, but just beside the point. Anytime Georgia Tech gets sacked, it's a good day, right? So Rudy comes around the end, and he sacks him. Most people say it was offsides. It's fine. He sacks him, and then everybody puts Rudy up on their shoulders, and they're like celebrating. Do you remember? Can you picture it? Can you picture, the little guy from The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings up there? You know what I'm talking about? What's the guy's name? Do you remember his name? It doesn't matter. It's
Sean. It's Sean. I'll look it up.
Sean. Either way, not right now. You can put it in the comments if you find it, right? Put it in the comments. Right? And so they got him on his shoulder, and they're like, yeah, we're celebrating. That's what rejoicing looks like. If you're not a sports balls movie person, right? I have another example. You know the ending of Top Gun? Like after like the legit dogfight has happened and Maverick has re-engaged, right? Like re-engage Maverick, and he re-engages, and all of a sudden he's just like blowing people out of the sky, and MiGs are falling left and right, and the last 2 MiGs, they bug out, and he comes back and the helicopter lands, and everybody's like, woo! And Iceman's like, man, I'll be your wing. You can be my wingman anytime. And then Tom Cruise looks at him and is like, no, you can be my wingman. That rejoicing, that's what rejoicing looks like. You know what I'm talking about? How does that kind of rejoicing happen in the midst of trials and grief? How does the Rudy moment, the Top Gun moment, the I won the lottery moment happen in the midst of trials and grief? I mean, we know what rejoicing looks like. What does suffering grief look like? We know how we feel. We dread it. We despise it. At some level, we fear it. We become emotionally exhausted through it. Bitterness can take root. We know how we act in grief. Sometimes we lash out at others. We blame someone else from time to time. We distract ourselves. We withdraw. There are moments in our lives when grief is so difficult we become an emotional wreck. How do you have the Rudy moment and the withdrawal, distracted, emotional wreck moment at the same time? Peter continues and he says, it's not only that you rejoice while suffering grief. He actually goes so far to say you rejoice while suffering grief in trials of many kind, in all kinds of trials. So it's not even just the loss of someone we love. A lot of times that's where we talk about grieving. But it's the grief that happens in the major disappointments in our lives. It's the grief that takes place when things go the complete opposite way we had hoped or prayed for. It's the mourning and the loss of the things that are dear to us. Not necessarily always people, sometimes way of life. Sometimes it's the way we have come to provide for ourselves. How can all three of those pieces fit together in one place? That's a good question. And I'm honestly not positive, but I know we can. You see, we can greatly rejoice while suffering grief in all kinds of trials. But it wasn't until the Sunday it started. Peter actually gives us a hint as he's writing to this scattered church that are going through these trials. He gives us a hint. And I want to apologize because I read you verse 6 first. It was on purpose. But I started at the end. And I really want to now point you towards kind of the beginning of the thought, because he gives us some hints there that I think gives us an answer to the question that is created in verse 6. And it starts in verse 3. He says this, praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. And so I want to break this down into just a few places. The first place is this. I think the answer to the question is in the very first line. Check it out. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. Is it possible? Are we seeing a hint here that the way we rejoice and the way we mourn, the way we rejoice and face trials, the way we rejoice and we suffer a bit in grief, all of those things, is it possible that we can experience all of that at the same time in worship? That when we exalt God and say, God, I praise you, I exalt you. Let me just talk to you for a second. Have you ever been on your knees, on your face in worship to God? Even just privately, have you ever had a moment where you said, you know what? I'm in such anguish and pain. The only thing I can do is go to God. Have you found yourself on your knees, face down, saying, God, I want to give you everything that I have. I want to make sure that all that I am is poured out in my heart to you in that moment. And you're rejoicing because the God of the universe hears your cry, but you're still crying because your heart is broken. Is there a hint there that if you're struggling to find some rejoicing moments and the suffering and grief that you're experiencing through these trials, could it be the very first place you should begin is worship? That maybe that unlocks what's to come. He begins with worship, praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. And then he follows up, in his great mercy. Mercy is such a difficult word for us to swallow. Mercy is not getting what we deserve. When someone has mercy on us, it means that we do deserve some wrath. That's what God says. Hey, I'm going to have mercy on you. I'm going to give you mercy because I'm not going to give you what you deserve. Justice is you getting what you deserve. And so this world of mercy and justice, it's difficult to line them up because God is perfectly just, which means he can't simply overlook the issues that we have as people. He can't do that. He actually, because of his perfection and the way that he pours out his justice, he actually said, hey, here's the deal. Because of my perfection and the way I pour out my justice, I'm going to create the need for a sacrifice to be made on your behalf, which is why we have Good Friday. And justice had to be served, and Jesus was the focus or the attention of that justice. And so because of that, we then receive mercy. Mercy. What is it that we deserve that God is withholding from us? If he's extending us mercy, that means he's not giving us what we deserve. What is it that he's withholding that we do deserve? That if it weren't for mercy, we would experience? Judgment? Wrath? Because of what? Because of what? It's that three-letter word. Sin. That three-letter word that we don't really like to talk about. It's an ugly word. It's definitely not a politically correct word. I know. But why isn't it politically correct to talk about sin? Why is it that we have to eggshell this thing, tiptoe around the eggshells when we start talking about that three-letter word? Why is that? I mean, it wasn't always like that. I mean, when we begin to really think about it, it seems to be like a recent thing. I've spent some time this week thinking about it. Why? I spent some time thinking about it. Why can't we talk about sin? And then it hit me. The reason it's become politically incorrect to talk about sin is because when it wasn't an issue, we started to talk about sin, but we only talked about someone else's sin. We didn't want to talk about our sin. We just wanted to talk about everybody else's sin. And eventually the culture got tired of saying, hey, stop pointing out my sin, you know? And there was like, hey, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't do this to one another. And our culture's wrapped our mind around this. Yeah, let's avoid it a little bit. Let's just avoid it. But maybe we can correct things this Easter morning. There are people that are watching right now that would never go to church because it's Easter Sunday, and that's what people do across America on Easter Sunday. They go to church. They can't go to church, so they're going online to church this morning. And so there are people watching right now, and I promise you, there are people watching right now that have said, you know what? I don't want to be a part of a church because every time I go, everybody just wants to talk about my sin. I got it. I get you. What if we could do something about it this morning? What if as followers of Jesus, let me talk to you for a second, followers of Jesus. What if this morning we could begin to set the record straight? Would you do it? How about this? Let's take it a step further. Why don't we put it in history? Why don't we record it where everyone can see it? Oh, you getting nervous? I'm getting nervous too. Maybe what we should do is you should comment right now on Facebook or YouTube. If you're a follower of Jesus, maybe you should say this. Say, I'm guilty of sin and in need of mercy. I'm guilty of sin and in need of mercy. And then hit send so that everybody sees it. As a follower of Jesus, that's what you're admitting. That's what you're admitting. You're saying, I'm guilty of sin and I'm in need of mercy. And this puts it out there because we're never taking this video down, right? And so this is going to be out there forever, which means that at some point your kid's going to be able to get back on when you're like, oh, and mommy and daddy never make a mistake. Of course, that never happens, right? And never make a mistake, and they're going to be like pulling up this Facebook video and say, well, right here at 11:24 on Easter Sunday 2020, you said right here that you are guilty of sin and need of mercy, right? They're going to pull it out. Your spouse might use it against you, but I ain't worried about those things. I'm worried about someone that's tuning in right now at this moment and said, I've given up on church and I've given up on God because every Christian I know pretends they do no wrong and only want to talk about the wrong I've done. You feel me? Yeah. We in the same boat on that? Yeah. So we should admit it. Just be honest. Just be honest. When we get honest with ourselves, it allows us to really begin to understand and appreciate what started that Sunday. Because when we recognize our great need of our own personal shortcomings when it comes to God, the Bible calls that sin. When we recognize the depth of that, it allows us to say, you know what, I am so then thankful for mercy. So that in my trials of grief, I can get on the floor and worship God to say, you know what, in the middle of this trial, it just feels excruciating, but God, I know you're listening, and I know you still have mercy on me. And we begin to rejoice while grieving through trials. And I guess the Easter Sunday message piece of this is this new birth into a living hope. You know, he says, hey, praise be to God the Father, our Lord Jesus Christ. It's in his great mercy he's given us new birth into a living hope. A living hope, not a dead hope, a living hope. Did you hear that? To be born again. To become a new creation. Man, that's what I'm talking about. That because of mercy, we get a chance to start over. And here's the cool thing, the way the Bible puts it, we don't even just get to start over once, we get to start over every single day. That grace is new constantly on us. That mercy is constantly given towards us because of what Jesus accomplished on the cross. And oh, that is good news. That is a good day. That is good time. But how is this even possible? How is this even possible? It's simple. Look at the end of verse 3. You can rejoice because of mercy, because you've been given new birth and a living hope. And why? Verse 3 at the very end, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. Yes, this is when it started. This is when it started. But we haven't made it to what yet? When Jesus resurrects from the grave, when the stone rolls away and the light comes forth and Jesus begins to walk out fully alive, like, come on, let me brush my shoulders off of sin and death. Devil, sorry to cancel the party, but it's over because I'm back and I'm alive. And oh, by the way, that sin thing, done, finished. Not just for me, but for every single person who follows me for the rest of time. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, devil. That's what he's saying. Have you seen what's happening here? I'm resurrecting me and everyone who comes after me. That's what he's saying. That's when it started, but it's not what started. In fact, Jesus resurrecting, that was the easy part compared to what started that day. You might say, well, hold on now. Hold on. How was Jesus resurrecting the easy part? Oh. Because when it started, what started that day had to not only be for who witnessed Jesus, to create the same thing for them, but it also had to create the very same thing for every single person that would hear about Jesus. It wasn't just the people that watched Jesus walk out of the grave that had to experience what started. It was for people that would never see him. People that would only hear with their ears. You see, God has given us a living hope because of mercy through the resurrection of Jesus. Our hope is not dead. You see, what's dead goes into the ground. What's dead goes into the ground. But what's living is rising. What's living is rising. But it wasn't rising till that Sunday. It wasn't rising till that Sunday. But ever since that Sunday it started, it's been rising. You know what it is? Do you know? Hope. Hope is rising. Right now, where you're at, hope is still rising. Ever since the Sunday it started rising, it's been rising. It has no ceiling. It has no cap. It will just continue to rise because what's living is rising. Have you lost your job? Have you been furloughed? Have your hours been cut? Your pay been cut? Your salary been cut? Look at me. Hope is rising. Hope is rising. Are you anxious about your future in this moment? Hope is rising. Are you watching from floor 5 or floor 6, the coronavirus floors at Noon and Piedmont? I promise you, hope is rising. In this moment, hope is rising. Are you beginning to realize that the church doesn't have to be the church only when it goes to church? that church is actually outside of walls? Because here's the deal. Church walls also have church ceilings. And church buildings can't hold this hope because this hope is rising. And you can't put a ceiling on it. You can't contain it within walls because hope is rising. Did you go to church this morning in your living room? Hope is rising. Did you watch church this morning on your phone? Hope is rising. Did you think this was going to be a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad Easter? Hope is rising. And ain't nothing going to stop it. You see, the enemy already took his best shots. He threw sin at it. Jesus brushed it off. Then he took on death, and he left death in its own grave. Hope is rising. Are you watching this morning and you feel like God is so far away? Is that you? We want to talk to you about hope. We want to have a conversation with you about how it's still rising. If that's you right now, you can text 678-661-6330. Text the word hope, just the word hope. Text the word hope to 678-661-6330. And we have folks that are standing by that want to begin to talk with you about hope. Not a hope that you put under your pillow, not a hope that you find when you get dressed up in pretty things, go to a fancy building, not a hope that you find, reading big words and memorizing verses, not a hope that you find at a temple, not a hope that you find when you make sacrifices, not a hope when you do any of those things, but a hope that you find in the real, actual person of Jesus and the mercy that comes because of what he did on Good Friday. Do you have a desire to find the ability to rejoice in the midst of your trials? Hope is rising. Right now, in this moment, hope is rising. If you're a follower of Jesus, will you let somebody know? Will you tell someone right now, hope is rising? Because we are all guilty of sin and in need of mercy. And we, as a church, are so thankful. Hope continues to rise. And long after this Easter, the most unique Easter of our lifetimes is in the past, and we simply tell stories about it. Even in those moments, hope will still be rising. I feel like we need a little bit of time to let this digest. And so we're going to sing. As we walk this out, you can text that number at any time. Just simply text the word hope, 678-661-6330. We're going to sing together. And I've got something pretty cool to show you this morning.